Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's NeoSystems CMMC Town Hall. Now I'd like to introduce your host, Ed Bassett from NeoSystems. Ed?
Thanks, Don, and welcome everyone to our continuing series of Town Hall Ask Me Anything sessions on cybersecurity maturity model certification. My guest today is Jerry Leishman. I want to mention to the audience, we are recording these sessions as part of our community outreach to the defense industrial base. Our focus at NeoSystems as a managed service provider is primarily on organizations that are seeking certification under CMMC, and that's mostly who we have in our audience today. If you have some questions in the audience, please send those in on the Q&A feature within Zoom, and I'll try to get those questions worked into the conversation with Jerry today. I'll start with the introduction of Jerry Leishman. Jerry is the Executive Vice President and National Security and Compliance Director at the Cortac Group, where he provides advisory services to the DoD supply chain on compliance with federal cybersecurity requirements. Jerry's background is cloud services, IT service management, and GRC, building on a 13-year stint at Microsoft. Jerry, thanks for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Ed, and the NeoSystems team. I'm looking forward to having a conversation about what's going on.
We like to talk in this series about the news and what's happening in the news, but it's been pretty quiet from the DoD lately in terms of announcements of things of a formal nature. They've been conducting an internal review, not unusual with the change of administration, but given that silence that we've seen from the DoD as they're kind of thinking through things, what are you hearing from the DIB as you're talking to them, concerns, et cetera?
Well, I'm also on the CMMC Accreditation Board Standards Group, which is trying to work with the DoD to really help drive adoption of CMMC. Been on that for a couple of years, and even at that level, it's been very quiet from the DoD. So even the industry leadership and the people that I'm working with day to day, and suppliers and partners like yourselves, we're all sitting and waiting, frankly. And it's really become a, in my term, it's not good business, primarily because it creates a lot of uncertainty in the industry. And that's where we really have to resolve this. And as an industry, we need to start leaning forward, because at the end of the day, DoD is not going to give us the answers. They're going to tell us what to do, but we really got to go figure this out ourselves and drive the industry to, help meet the goal of, securing this country. So
Reagan Eames was on this series a couple of weeks ago, and he said the DoD is not going to save us. And I couldn't agree more. I think, so industry is kind of leaning in. So last week we saw a joint communication go out from 3 industry associations. So for anyone out there in the audience who didn't see this, this was a letter sent from the Information Technology Industry Council, ITI, the National Defense Industrial Council, and the Professional Services Council. So these are 3 very large industry representative groups. They got together and wrote a letter to the DoD voicing some of their concerns about the pace of the DoD, encouraging them to remain publicly committed to CMMC. And given that these trade associations represent a pretty significant swath of the defense industrial base, these are purpose built to interact with government on matters of policy. Jerry, what do you think in terms of how that kind of a letter, that kind of a move is going to be received?
I think it's going to be very positive, and it really tells the DoD that industry, you and I, folks on the phone are ready to go. We understand the need, but we need clarity, right? And because we don't have clarity yet, there's uncertainty, and everybody is slowing their motion to move forward. Therefore, delaying the ultimate goal is to secure this country and our supply chain. So it's really the challenge today is, just uncertainty. And I work with a lot of small, medium, even large organizations like Microsoft, and they're asking me daily, is this real or is it not? And, the DoD needs to come forward and figure out what they're doing and give that clarity so industry can move forward in a thoughtful and strategic way.
So as you read through the letter and saw some of the concerns that they're bringing up in there, I guess, what was your takeaway? What did you see as the highlights? And do you agree with the status they're taking, the stance that they're taking there?
Yeah, the 2 biggest takeaway, there's a lot of pieces to that. One is just lack of communication. I can call out that there's been no updates over the last year on some of the feedback industry's given about the CMMC model 1.02. With the Biden administration coming in and reviewing the program, there's been no feedback. The GAO is doing an assessment. So there's lots of activity going on, but nothing coming out to industry. And we've been waiting, for example, response to all the industry feedback on the 1.2.0 model. It's been over a year. And I don't think it should be taking that long. And it's been quiet instead of interactive. So that's one big area, is just lack of communication, creating uncertainty for everybody. Because we all want to move forward, but nobody doesn't want to invest because they don't want to invest in areas that aren't going to be important for the DoD. Second is it's still unclear, as there's still multiple regulatory regimes out there: FedRAMP, FISMA, SRG, CMMC, DFARS, NIST 171. Still uncertainty about, God, how am I going to meet my organizational requirements across these different regulatory regimes? How do I prioritize? How do I optimize? So they're a real concern about, can we just have one federal mandate that we all can start leaning into and get there faster and remove all the uncertainty and provide clarity. So it's really about clarity and simplification are the two things that I think industry is really asking for in that letter that we saw.
And I think, at the same time that it's been quiet on the CMMC front, the government hasn't said that they're backing away from it. They've been upping enforcement actions around, the current compliance requirements, right? The DFARS 7012, the NIST NR 171. These have been in place for years. They've done some things to increase enforcement of those with SPUR score reporting and all that. That's certainly still happening, right? There's no indication that they're looking for companies to do less. So the reaction of companies that you mentioned of potentially sort of slowing their roll, I would say certainly that's not the intention. The letter that we were talking about expressed some of that same concern. They said they were worried that these industry associations said they were worried that companies might continue to delay implementation of important security practices. So that's, like I say, that's definitely unintended consequence. The government is their message of their delay is not, hey, do less security. That's for sure. But people want finality, they want clarity, as you say. So I guess, and when you hear that, you mentioned you're hearing that from companies all the time. What's your advice to them? What are you telling them that they should do? I mean, is slow the roll an okay answer? Do we need to wait for answers? Can we not make decisions until we get these answers? Or should we be moving out on things that we have some clarity on?
It's a great question. And, I'll take a corporate perspective first. Is cybersecurity is here to stay, regardless if you're on the commercial or the federal or the DoD side. We're seeing ransomware attacks, SolarWinds, Colonial Pipeline, JBS that are disrupting all supply chains across all industries. Good news is the DoD has CMMC and a good approach to beginning to mature our cybersecurity posture for our companies and giving them basically a guidance and a roadmap on how to do that. As you know, many of our small and medium-sized suppliers really have only focused on physical security in the past, and they can't even conceptualize what cybersecurity or digital security means in this new world. So having those, the NIST 171 as a baseline to move the company forward, just to protect your customers' information, your own IP, is what I say is step number one. Everybody should be doing that regardless of industry. And in the DoD industry specifically, with the DFARS interim rule that went into effect November 30th, if you've got ITAR, CUI, and sensitive information where you get a DFARS flow down clause into your contracts today, you are now obligated, as you called out, to report your SPUR score as of November 30th. And that basically what that means is moving from self-attestation, which everybody says they're doing because they signed their contracts historically with DFARS clauses. Now the DoD is putting some enforcement into saying, okay, now you've said you've done it, tell me what you got, right? So it starts to put some accountability in place. And that becomes really important because before they could fake it till they make it. Now they got to pay to play. And the penalty is, a False Claims Act if there is a breach. So that's a significant brand buster for a company, as well as just being breached and have to go public. But what I've seen with several of my companies, the DoD procurement teams are actually withholding existing awards today until people file their SPUR score. So I've had two customers say, hey, I need a SPUR score by Friday to get this award. And so we've kind of been hair on fire for them. What do I do? And we go in and help them do that, unlocks the award, and then they can kind of move down their journey. So it's not if, but when for existing customers that have CUI today to move down this journey. So I would say NIST 171 is your baseline. You just got to get there no matter where you're at. And for DoD procurements today, you need to get there and then begin to continue to evolve on the CMMC level 3 or primary level 3 for most organizations that have CUI, and move forward, and then get CMMC, and then hopefully the DoD will come out with prescriptive guidance on what they're going to be assessing against. So you can actually, as an organization, implement something that the assessors will know what to look for and give you that certification. Because we don't have the assessment guides in place today. So everybody has a single source of truth. So that source of truth is going to be really key. So you got to keep aware of what's going on in industry, stay ahead of it. And I'll just say one more thing. There are early adopters and there's laggards in any adoption of new technology or industry changes. What I'm seeing is there's about 10% that consider themselves savvy executives that want to be early adopters to go and really tackle cybersecurity and be prepared. One, get audit ready, I'll say, since we're not doing certifications yet, but being audit ready and staying audit ready demonstrates a competitive advantage and will help you win business as a low risk provider. So I know several organizations that have already been winning more business because they can say they're CMMC level 3 audit ready. And that means a lot to the DoD right now. Even though they haven't been certified, it's all about risk management as part of the supply chain. It's not about cost anymore. So there's an opportunity for early adopters to go win market share, not only in DoD, but across the federal agencies. So that's the other word of advice. There is a big business benefit by moving forward here faster than slower.
You mentioned the need for clarity, and that's something that was definitely in that letter. They mentioned clarity, they mentioned consistency, and let's dig into that a little bit and see what where do we need that clarity, right? So things like, for example, NIST 171 says you have to have multi-factor authentication. It's pretty clear. It's a requirement. It's been a requirement since that standard was published, and DFAR 7012 made it effective in 2017. Yep. So in some cases, I think the government feels like, hey, we've made it clear. You're not doing it yet. You need to get on it. If you're taking a -5 on your SPURS score, the expectation is pretty clear. We're giving you a 5x penalty for that, for not doing that. So, yep. There's a good bit of clarity there. So you've been working with CMMC standard. You're trying to apply it to real world solutions. Yep. What do you see as the most pressing topics where clarity is needed, right? Some of these things, again, they're fundamental. It's clear. Yep. Where do you think that we need clarity in order to move ahead?
Yeah, I see 4 areas. One is they got to just take all the feedback from industry on the 1.02 model and get back with a revised model, and what should be happening today, right? It should have happened months ago, but it hasn't. So they've got to come out with the new model based on all the feedback. And hopefully they don't look at it as an ivory tower approach where they think they have the answers, but they really are not practical in nature. And we've seen that before with government. So we're hoping that not only do they come out, but they actually address some of the industry feedback and actually have some communications either prior or before final to confirm that what they've done will be feasible, cost effective, and practical. Because one of the concerns is the feedback was over a year ago, right? And there's been a lot of learnings in the year. Are they going to take into account today's environment, or are they going to use last year's environment to address what the new model should be? So we'll already be behind the game there. So hopefully that is finalizing the model with industry participation and validation to get an optimal model that's implementable, like I said. Second one is, once they have the model, right, there's still a lot of details about, well, what does that mean? How do I implement this particular 2-factor? There's might be 20 different ways to do it. They leave it up to the organization to implement it the way that works best for them, as long as it's sufficient to meet the requirement. But there's so many options that it gets confusing. They need to narrow down the guidance to get more specific about sufficient solutions and how to meet some of the requirements. So it's really more of a practitioner's guide, and that's what the assessment guide. Again, they need to get that implementation guidance out there to help narrow it down so people have something to work with and start filling their gaps based on prescriptive guidance. And it's not going to be perfect. You still need industry experts to interpret that for your organization, but at least it's moving the ball forward. The third one, which is a real difficult one, is just the CUI marking. There's many of the government organizations in the DoD space don't effectively and correctly mark some of the CUI or ITAR data. So it's up to the industry to receive it and recognize it. they spend a lot of time and back and forth wasting because the data wasn't correctly marked. Therefore, they need to do a better job marking it up front so we can better manage what's the scope and the data, and then that's what's the boundaries that we got to protect. So we spend a lot of time because we don't know enough and the DoD won't tell us. So we need better marking. And lastly, there's a lot of investments have been made in cloud services like Microsoft Gov, AWS Gov around FedRAMP certifications, but there's still no clarity about reciprocity. And what I mean is that those prior investments that companies have made in those systems, are they going to be sufficient so they get reciprocity so they don't have to do something different? We need clarity about that to help define what those right size, cost optimized, and sufficient solutions would be. And that takes companies' current investments and then they apply where the gaps are at. So that's kind of a fourth area that we need clarity from the government to help us really get our roadmap in place on what we need to do, how we need to do it to get audit ready. And then the assessor and the once we have RFPs that have CMMC requirements in there, then we'll be in a position to know how long it's going to take a company to get there and prepare for certification to participate in an RFP. So that's kind of the high level thinking that I have and that I'm sharing.
I'll throw out one more that's on my mind. So you mentioned that we don't have assessment guides. So we do have the assessment guides. What we don't have is a scoping guide, right? So they talked about the DoD's promised a scoping guide, and I see so many of the early questions around scope. And frankly, that's a problem for the current compliance requirements as well. Those compliance requirements under DFAR 7012 only apply to covered contractor information systems. I'm not sure it's totally clear to all the contractors how they decide what's in, what's out, right? When they draw a boundary of a covered contractor information system, what's adequate level of segmentation? And that's something that has been a problem on the current requirements. It's something that the DoD has said they will address with CMMC. So I think we do need and should see some clarity there. I guess I want to reemphasize your earlier comment. I don't think that means people should sit and wait for it, right? It could be a while before we see these things. I think there's some very smart moving out people can do to do things that they know to be good security without worrying too much about the nits, if you will. So I want to ask a question about some of those nits. So we see a lot of cycles being spent on questions of interpretation. So I just saw yesterday, a client of ours, ex-client, he's moved on, but to a different employer. But Jeff Baldwin posts some very interesting series on his LinkedIn, digging into the nitty gritty of certain, takes individual controls. So the one he just published on was, do we have to put stickers that say CUI on our laptops? Yes or no? And really digging into all the regulations. So this is super geeky stuff, right? This is like take one thing and dive deep and have a conversation. And there's, an ongoing uber geek conversation about that topic. And I think that's the kind of thing that the DoD is never going to clarify with 100% certainty, right? You're always going to have, people that get excited about this stuff. I do. Jeff obviously does. He's spending his time writing about it. These are healthy conversations about what is the right way to secure a system. But we see people, I think, spending a lot of time on these questions of interpretation, and they become sort of analysis paralysis. So my question for you, I guess, bringing this back to less of a story, more of a question, do you think government should play a role in answering those kind of specific questions about a specific set of circumstances? So I'm thinking about this like the IRS does with the things they call the private letter rulings, right? So if you have a question about how to interpret the tax code, you can ask the IRS for a private letter ruling about your specific circumstance, and they publish those, and other people can use those as guidance, but obviously they're not intended as sort of a general thing. They're just for that one circumstance, but they get used as a form of sort of case law, I guess. Do you think the government should play a role like that? Do you think that they will?
I think the government has to provide the framework. What are the boundaries in the industry, optimize around its innovation of process, technologies, and people to come up with the right size solutions that are cost optimized for their specific organization. But it's all about protecting the data, and every company is going to be different on what data they have and how they need to protect it to not affect the end users and the productivity of the company. So the DoD, I don't want DoD telling anybody that you have to implement X, Y, and Z, because that's going to break a lot of companies because it may not be the right solution for them. So I think a framework is really important. The other part is I need clarity on expectations. So when one of these guides come out, so the organization that reads it understands it, and that then when the assessor reads it, they understand it. So when they come together, there's no mismatch of expectations. I would hate to have an organization build out a solution that they think is audit ready, but then have an assessor come in and say, hey, you missed the mark. Look at this. Well, how do you know that? Well, that's my interpretation, right? How do you fight that, right? So I really need a lot of clarity on what sufficiency is. And so that's really important. So each company can build it the way they need it and it's sufficient. And then the assessors will give it validation based on those other things, reciprocity, CUI tagging, and all those things that really need to get done as part of the process.
And the risk is if we make it too prescriptive, then it turns into a checklist and everybody does what it says, because even if it's a stupid idea. And on the other hand, if it's too general, then you get these different interpretations. And under the current regime where you self-attest,
yep,
you don't have the same risk, right? I guess you do if a DIPCAC auditor comes in and disagrees with your evaluation and your interpretation and how you've handled things. But again, the topic I just mentioned that Jeff Baldwin was writing about was, do I put CUI stickers on my laptops? For some people, that might be the right answer. For other people, it's a warning banner. For other people, it's a sticker on the inside on the hard drive, on the SSD chip or whatever, right? Other people may say, we believe we don't need any labeling of that device at all. So there's not a right or wrong answer. And on the one hand, it would be nice if the government would just tell us yes or no, and we do whatever they say. But on the other hand, that would dumb the process down in a way that makes it ineffective, right? So the risk is that if the government doesn't make it specific, we all argue about it, and we might argue with our assessors, and we might run a risk that they disagree with us. So that's, I don't know, it's a balancing act. I agree, and I think we're going to get clarity over time, but I don't think we're going to get clarity in the sense of fully prescriptive guidance from the government. I haven't seen it yet.
Well, a good example of that is, remember when Enron had its deferred revenue issues and they created SOX as we know it. I think it was a one-liner in the laws that says you need to do these things, but there was no prescription implementation around that. And that's evolved now over 20 years, and it's created a lot of best practices from some of the big four accounting firms, solutions and tools, and now it's kind of like it's part of doing business. I think that same model is going to be applied to kind of the DoD. They're going to say, this is what you need to do. You guys go figure it out. You optimize with what the best solutions are, because we're not good at that. We just know what we need to have the data protected. Industry, go figure it out. And force, I'll use the word commoditization, which really means driving down costs of getting cybersecurity to protect the US data. Industry is best at doing that through innovation and cost effectiveness and scale. And I think that's one of the overall goals of how they're going to implement CMMC.
So Jerry, I got an audience question kind of following up on our conversation earlier about the letter that went out from the industry groups to the DoD. And audience members asking two things. Why has DoD been quiet, in your opinion? And how do you think they're going to respond to that letter from the industry groups? What do you expect?
Yeah, so I think why they have not responded.
They just got it yesterday, but I mean, why have they been quiet up to this point? And then how do you think they'll respond to the letter now that they have it?
Yeah, they've been quiet up to this point because there's been, how are they going to process the feedback to get the Biden administration coming in and evaluating, is that within their policy objectives? There's been a lot of movement. There's Katie Arrington's piece of that. Where is the accountability going to really land? And so my gut says they're working really hard behind the scene, and from insiders that I'm talking to, they're doing that, but they're not communicating out. So it gives that feeling that, no information, everybody has fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and nobody thinks anything's going on. I think in reality, there's a lot going on, and it's become more of a strategic sort of decision versus just a tactical around the DoD, because you've seen the Biden executive order, you've seen the White House order for critical infrastructure, you've seen DHS, you've seen several different, high-level government regulations around cybersecurity. And I think they're trying to put all those pieces together. At least I'm hopeful that they are, because that's one of the challenges for industry is, which one do I listen to? I need one. So is the government hearing that? We'll come out with a one standard around cybersecurity for all federal government. Let's hope so, right? It makes it easier for everybody. Is it a FedRAMP for, cybersecurity? Hopeful, or for our internal systems. So I think that's it. The other one is, a lot of the folks in DoD are not practitioners like us. So they are concerned, and they've gotten good feedback in some of the comments that, hey, this is not implementable. This doesn't make sense for what goes on day in, day out. So I think they're trying to rationalize their thinking around practicality, because they know if they go out with something that's not implementable, they're going to get, hammered by industry. So I think they're trying to rationalize that as the second thing. And the third one is there's liability, right? If they come out with something and industry does a lot of stuff and then suddenly they change again, there's a lot of cost to us in industry that are trying to keep up, and people are going to get pissed off. So I don't think they want to do that. So my goal, there's an article that came out yesterday that said, I think it was under Salazar, one of his lieutenants said, you keep going, we're getting close, but we've heard this for a while. We're going to make this happen. So I think the complexity and the elevation of this from all the ransomware has really forced them to step back and say, how do we do this correctly? And the industry's got a lot of uncertainty until they do. But we hope that something will come out soon. Can't go much longer.
Getting some input from the CMMC AB, and their message was the same as what you just said, that it looks quiet on top, but underneath the duck, the duck's head looks quiet on top, and underneath the feet are paddling like crazy, right? I think there is a lot going on. I think I have some faith in that. I don't believe that there's any back pedaling or walking away from this. I think it's taking long because the wheels of government turn at a pace that may not be the one we would like. So let me ask a question about, you mentioned cost, and that is a concern. The letter, the industry association letter, talks to the sort of disproportionate impacts on small businesses. But also they reinforce in there that, it's important to hold everyone to the same standards, right? If we lower the bar for small businesses because of cost, then we introduce weakness. In the current framework that we have, do you think that CMMC is achievable for everyone? Is it a framework that can work at small business where we have the same standard for everybody?
I think so. I think we have to come up with clarity in the requirements. I think industry has to come up with cost affordable solutions that scale, and that's most likely going to be in the cloud. So you've got some cultural changes to move from some of these older supplier companies into moving to the cloud and having somebody else do all the work and pay a subscription fee, but it secures your data. And then, the complexity that's there is way too much. We need to come up with simple, easy to understand for a CEO of a metal fabricator with 50 people, right? That's never been under a regulatory regime before, and now they have to. It's got to be simple, understandable, affordable, and easily implementable. And that's only going to happen through industry suppliers like a Microsoft or Amazon or Cortac or NeoSystems providing what I'm calling an integrated solution that cover a majority of those requirements that are in CMMC that they can leverage while they do still keep their business going, but leverage that and have experts run that for them as a kind of an operational cost versus a CapEx cost. So if we do that and organizations are willing to take some risks and change, I think everybody can get there, because we're working with several of those that are early adopters say, yeah, I want to get everything out of my physical facility because I'm tired of hiring IT guys, security guys. It's just, I can't keep up. Let me go to somebody that can do that as a day job, and they focus on what they need to do with end user support. If they have the right attitude, it's definitely doable, but there's a lot of cultural change and acceptance of the industry is changing. There's more requirements. We have to change the way we do business, or who our suppliers may be to continue to be in the business, because they're tying contracts to it. If you don't do CMMC, then you don't get contracts, and therefore your business is at risk. So lots of different things coming.
I think that's good advice about simplifying from a consumer perspective, right? I mean, flying airplanes is inherently complex and risky, and the way we simplify that for the consumer is we create airlines and we sell them airplane tickets, and all they got to do is buy a ticket and hop on, and we show them exactly what they got to do. We show them where to sit, we show them how to clasp their seatbelt, we show them how to pop on the oxygen mask, and the airline takes care of everything else, right? So
all the maintenance, everything else is taken care of, and
I think that that's a model where I think we're realizing that IT is more like an airplane than a car. With a car, we can teach people to drive in high school and give them all cars, and it's reasonably safe, although not 100%, but reasonably. And so it's a skill people can expect to learn and do themselves. Whereas, flying a plane, only a very few people go out and get a pilot's license, right? It takes a concerted effort to get to that level of expertise. And I think we're realizing that building IT in a way that's resilient against these kind of threats is a lot more like flying an airplane than driving a car. I don't know.
Yeah, or it's, if you don't want to have a car in the city, you just Uber everywhere, right? That's what we're doing. If you have a need, just hire it out. They take care of it. They know where to go. You just jump in and they take care of you, and hopefully they do it safely and that you have trust in them. And that's what's really important in terms of your partners, is that you have to trust them, because they're holding your data as well as yourself. And they're going to sit across the table from the assessors and say, how are you manage your data through your organization and your suppliers, which would include a NeoSystem or a Cortac. We wouldn't host any of the data, but we would help advise them on a low risk approach that are cost optimized to help them through this journey.
I see a lot of innovation in the industry to help make this a reality. So that's good news. We're kind of at the bottom of the hour, so I'll ask you one wrap up question and then make some announcements of some upcoming events. So to wrap things up today, I guess one piece of advice you have for cybersecurity decision makers, if you're, especially those people who are prone to sitting on the fence where there's a lack of clarity, indecision can be almost as bad as making a poor decision, right? How do we clear out some of that clutter and move forward? Where would you suggest people put their focus right now today?
My bottom line is the industry standard, is, in my perspective, is going to be NIST 800-171, and I don't care what industry you're going to be going forward. So you just need to do that as cyber hygiene, and it's good for your business, it's good for your customers, and it's going to be table stakes going forward in this new world that we live in with connected internet, which is a really important one. And I think you need to get started now, right? There's lots of tools and solutions. Just use NIST 171 as your initial baseline. Everything is building off of that in the future. So treat it as a journey. Treat it as an engineering project, right? A lot of people I work with look at it as a big hairball, right? But if you break it down, let's go through and figure out where we're at, kind of an assessment. Now you're informed. Now you can say, okay, now I know where my posture, where my gaps are. Let's plan for how to mitigate some of those gaps. I can take that a step 2. Okay, now I know what the right size cost optimized solutions are. Step 3, let's go implement them in a structured way based on a budget, so I can basically get secure and compliant. But one of the things many people haven't talked about is once you get there, you got to stay there, because the CMMC requirements have processes that require you to do an annual risk assessment. You got incident response, you got to keep your documentation up. So you got to think about a managed compliance program. Standing up a program just like you do anything else. You got to keep it running to meet up to 3 years for your CMMC certification. And then if you can get secure and compliant and stay compliant, now you have a competitive advantage against laggards that you can go out and win more business. So that's kind of the big picture, why it's beneficial from a business. It's going to happen anyway. Why wait? Take advantage of the opportunity. It's a great market opportunity. The government is good at changing the rules. And if you adopt the rules early and look ahead, as a savvy owner, it's an opportunity that they're creating for you. Look at what the opportunity the industry had created in SOX or PCI or ISO 9000. All of those created industry opportunities for individuals. This CMMC is 10 times bigger than all of those combined, because it affects the data through entire systems, not just financials, credit card, or process. This is everything in an organization. So it's very large, complex. So there's huge opportunities for everybody to be an early adopter. So that was kind of my parting shot. And one last thing, grants. Government's coming out with grants. Go to your local manufacturing extension program and get grants. They're finishing up their current grant cycle by the end of the fiscal year, but they're coming out with a whole nother set of grants. Go to them, get some money. Most will pay up to 75% of your costs to a consultant, and start moving forward. Don't wait. Get the money you can to help you through that journey if you don't want to fully invest.
Jerry, thanks very much. I want to thank you. I want to thank Wade Forbes, who's been sketch noting this conversation. He describes this weekly session as cyber therapy. So it is for me, at least. I get to talk to some interesting people about things that matter deeply to me. So I hope it is for those in the audience as well. I want to mention 2 upcoming events. Jerry, do you want to mention about the CMMC Boot Camp coming up?
Yeah, no, that's great. So September 29th in Dallas, there's an event called the CMMC Boot Camp, where we're bringing many industry experts and leaders, including Ed and myself. We'll go and we're going to talk about the really tough challenges as an industry. And it kind of like we're going to lean in and start defining how the DoD can maybe move forward. And this comes back, is the DoD going to hear? I hope they're listening. So that'll be the first part of it. The second part is Reagan Edens, who was the standards lead. and who's what I call a master CMMC trainer, who trained all the provisional assessors, will go deep into 4 or 5 areas. So you're going to really be able to take his perspective, how he's combining all the different regulations into a unified approach to go attack CMMC around certain sets of controls. So if you're really a practitioner or a leader and you want to understand how to move forward in cybersecurity as well as CMMC, it's there's nothing's been put together like it yet. So it's a great opportunity to really go deep and meet a lot of industry leaders at this event. So I just throw that in.
Yep, as Jerry mentioned, yeah, I'll be on the panel there. I'm honored to be considered as part of that. So it's September 29th. It's in person in Dallas or virtual. You can attend either way, and they've kept the price very reasonable for an all-day event. In my opinion, compared to some other training sort of events that you might use for CPE credits and that sort of thing, it's about 1/10 the usual price. So check that out. The URL for that to register is in the chat window here of the Zoom. So if you want to click on that, it's an Eventbrite link for the CMMC Boot Camp. The other event I want to mention is a Cyber Guild event that NeoSystems is sponsoring. This is Uniting Women in Cyber. It's an annual event, October 5th and 6th, virtual only. And there is a discount code and a link in the chat window as well. So that discount code gets you some percent, I think maybe 50%. Maybe I shouldn't promise that. I don't know what it is. But it gives you a good discount off the registration price there. Uniting Women in Cyber, October 5th and 6th. And then please do join us back here for future town hall meetings. Our next session is going to be next Wednesday, September 22nd at our usual time, 1 p.m. Eastern. You'll see the promotional emails come out if you're on our list. If not, go to our website, neosystemscorp.com for those details. Thanks, everyone.